Salutations. Today's briefing, Russo-Ukrainian War. What does it mean for AUKUS and the Quad? The Russo-Ukrainian War has brought many countries to provide aid to Ukraine, and some to Russia, not as co-belligerents, but by way of material, financial, and intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance support. Primarily here for Ukraine has been NATO, which has provided substantial amounts of intelligence, equipment, and training. For many, this has raised the question of how this war might influence a potential US-China conflict over Taiwan. Now, there is no NATO in the Pacific, but there is AUKUS and the Quad. These groupings are designed to counter China, but are not mutual defence treaties like NATO and have far smaller membership. This briefing will examine certain aspects of the Russo-Ukrainian War, including NATO's involvement, and how these aspects might influence AUKUS and the Quad members' actions with regard to a US-China conflict over Taiwan. NATO has been preparing Ukraine for a conflict with Russia since 2014. According to Angela Merkel, the 2014 Minsk Agreement was an attempt to give Ukraine time. She also used this time to become stronger, as you can see today. And Jens Stoltenberg, the current NATO Secretary General, actually NATO allies and NATO have been there, Ukraine, since 2014, trained, equipped and supported Ukrainian armed forces. Summing up NATO's strategy, a delaying action through negotiation, the Minsk agreements, weakening Russia through sanctions, and the preparation of Ukraine's military through training and provision of equipment. The training and equipment part of this strategy was always going to be able to endure once conflict commenced, given the geographic location of NATO to Ukraine, a significant advantage both prior to the war and since. Additionally, during the war, NATO intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance assets have been able to operate freely close to the Ukrainian border, providing crucial support to Ukraine. In terms of equipment support, NATO's initial approach was to scour its former Warsaw Pact members for equipment that is compatible with existing Ukrainian stocks, simplifying training and logistics support and achieving the most immediate effect. This effort has now been extended to almost any country with equipment similar to that in use by Ukraine in early 2022. How might these aspects of the Russo-Ukrainian War influence US and Allied efforts to make a Chinese invasion of Taiwan unpalatable? Well, according to the immediate former NATO Secretary General, weapons are what counts. With the help of its partners, Taiwan must become a porcupine bristling with armaments to deter any possible attempt to take it by force. But who will make Taiwan a porcupine and how? In the Indo-Pacific, it will likely be the Quad and/or AUKUS. The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, the Quad, is a strategic security dialogue, not a formal alliance, comprising the US, Japan, Australia and India. For the US, Australia and Japan, the Quad is a vehicle for enlisting Indian support for containing China in general, and more specifically, setting the conditions for a unified response to China over a conflict with Taiwan. Note there will likely be significant pressure from Russia for India to not become involved in a China-Taiwan conflict. This pressure could also extend to include other BRICS members, possibly Brazil and South Africa. India might calculate that it is better for it to put pressure along the line of actual control with China and possibly take advantage of any other opportunities that arise there. India will also, in this scenario, be keeping a watchful eye on Pakistan. For India, it will be a balancing act between maintaining a mutually beneficial relationship with Russia while keeping the US on side. India, understandably, wants to act with sovereign flexibility and not to be forced to act at the wishes of others. Now, India may well support the Quad's efforts to train and equip Taiwan's military, but is unlikely to directly participate in these actions. For Japan, it is likely to focus the Quad's efforts on achieving consensus on political and economic moves to garner broader support against China, with its military actions covered under the Treaty of Mutual Cooperation and Security between Japan and the United States of America. While Japan's constitution would likely preclude arms transfers to Taiwan, recent Japanese actions and statements suggest Japan is likely to entertain such transfers. For Australia, in terms of the Quad's actions, It would be supporting Japan's political and economic moves, with its military contributions likely to be under the AUKUS umbrella. What AUKUS actually is remains to be seen. For Australia, it's a partnership. For the US, it's an agreement. The UK have called it an alliance. Currently, it is comprised of Australia, the UK and the US, but it is possible new members may be included in the not too distant future. However, the membership of AUKUS is likely to be very selective. See a related briefing. As with the Quad, but in a more meaningful military sense, AUKUS was created to confront China. Because of this, AUKUS is likely to be the fulcrum for US military efforts in countering China over Taiwan. Now, the smaller the membership of an organisation, the greater likelihood of agreement on difficult issues. The greater the number of members, the greater the likelihood of dissension by some. AUKUS will be cautious about who joins next, but Japan is a very likely candidate. In terms of the US-China conflict over Taiwan, AUKUS members are likely to act in full agreement with regard to sanctions and the provision of training, equipment and intelligence and surveillance support. Unlike the US and NATO's position with regard to direct military action against Russia, where they don't want troops on the ground in Ukraine, in a Taiwan conflict scenario, it is highly likely AUKUS militaries will be directly involved in combat with the PLA, if they want Taiwan to prevail. In terms of equipment support to Taiwan, there are two main issues. A country's reticence to supply Taiwan with weapons, even if they have the appropriate weapons in the first place, given the likely economic repercussions from China. And two, much of the equipment in Taiwanese service is not currently in working order in many countries, even in the US, for example, M60 tanks and Hawk surface-to-air missile systems. It is the newer systems the US has started to provide that will be most needed by Taiwan. Now, only a small number of countries will have both the military wherewithal and political stomach to provide Taiwan with military equipment. But how will these countries get that military equipment to Taiwan? Now, a number of NATO countries border Ukraine, thus facilitating training and equipment transfers. Japan is the only Quad/AUKUS country that borders Taiwan. But as for all Quad/AUKUS countries, any equipment transfers will need to be done by ship or aircraft, a time-consuming and more difficult task during conflict. This suggests equipment transfers will largely need to be completed before hostilities commence. Now, what equipment might be sent to Taiwan? The US has been providing training and equipment to Taiwan's military for many years. Recently, more sophisticated weapon systems have been supplied, including M1 Abrams, Patriot surface-to-air missile systems, and HIMARS multiple launch rocket systems. What equipment might AUKUS Quad members provide? Well, some equipment that has been mentioned in dispatches from the Russo-Ukrainian war are the HIMARS, which could be provided by Australia, and the MLRS, which could be provided by the UK and Japan. Together with systems we will likely see in Ukraine this year, such as the M1 Abrams, which Australia could supply to Taiwan, and the Patriot surface-to-air missile system, which Japan could supply. As for India, what might it send, even if it decided to? In summary, NATO began training and equipping Ukraine in 2014 in preparation for a conflict with Russia, and since the conflict began, has been able to supply Ukraine both with former Soviet weapons and Western equipment without fear of interdiction. Also, it is not only NATO that is providing equipment to Ukraine. Countries outside of NATO are also contributing. The Western weapon systems delivered, however, are not able to be utilised immediately, as they are totally different to what the Ukraine military is used to operating, delaying their impact on the battlefield. There is no Indo-Pacific NATO, with the entities likely to act in concert against China being AUKUS and the Quad. It is unlikely non-AUKUS or Quad countries would provide military equipment to Taiwan in a conflict with China. Only AUKUS could implement military efforts to support Taiwan, which, prior to the outbreak of conflict, would focus on training and equipping Taiwan's military with modern US equipment currently operated by Taiwan. So Patriot missiles and multiple launch rocket systems, which Japan could provide, multiple launch rocket systems from the UK, and M1 Abrams and HIMARS, which could be provided by Australia. together with intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance support. And, once conflict commenced, the provision of military forces, with Japan, Australia and the UK likely to join the US. Given the challenges with resupplying once conflict has commenced, Taiwan will basically need to fight with what it has if the balloon goes up. Also, US and allies will need to move critical support systems close to Taiwan in order to provide effective support before the conflict commences. These actions of training and equipping Taiwan and pre-positioning of forces will be obvious to China. How might it respond? That concludes today's briefing. Thank you for watching. Happy to take suggestions for future briefings from subscribers, so please subscribe, like and share. Until next time, Vale de Cero.